Welcome back to the C.T.W. podcast. I'm your host, Deronquez Wynn, and I thank you guys for tuning in again. We're going to jump straight into this episode or this video because I think this is one I'm excited about. This is an area where I've learned to overcome in my personal life. This is an area where dealing with people, I see that a lot of people don't realize that they have these or still walk in this area of their life. And I think it's important for people to be free. I think it's important for people to live a free life. That's what God came to do in John 10:10, what Jesus came to do, and that's what God intended for Jesus to do in John 10:10. It says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. And so when we're not walking in freedom and when we're not walking in abundance in every area, then we're not actually experiencing what Jesus and God intended for us to live. And so this episode will be called Living an Untriggered Life. And so that's something that I've had to overcome significantly. It does not mean that I'm fully over it. There are still times where I still have those. But I think it's important for people to understand that living a life where you're untriggered is a life where you're free. It's a life where you're living in the fullness that is intended for us to live. So I'm gonna jump right into it. So first point I have here is, what is a triggered life? A triggered life is a life where traumas and wounds are no longer what is a untriggered life? A untriggered life is where traumas and wounds no longer control you or cause you to react to certain situations harshly or destructively. And so an untriggered life is where you are now free from the certain things that you have previously experienced, whether it's relationships, family situations, mentors, spiritual leaders, whatever the situation or circumstance may be. You are no longer living in that realm of your life where it's no longer controlling you, it's no longer producing something in your nervous system. Your body is no longer responding to it anxiously. You're overstimulated, fearful, maybe you're guilt stricken, whatever the situation or circumstance may be. You are no longer living in that space of your life. And so some of the examples I have here of a triggered life, or let me go to this next point. Actually, no, I'm going to give you the examples first. Some of the examples of a triggered life is this. Verbally, where you lash out with words saying negative things, rude, disrespectful, because you feel or have felt disrespected, but you call it the truth when it's really just pain that it shows up in emotions. And so there are many situations for when you're going through, when you have triggers. Most people have them, but verbal abuse or having verbal disputes is a way to know if you're still triggered, a way to know if you're still walking with wounds or trauma. When you're lashing out verbally, you're being rude or disrespectful or any of that. Another way to know if you're still triggered, still walking in a triggered life, is physically, you push or punch stuff to harm oneself or others, drinking to numb the pain, cutting your body, excessively eating, avoiding upkeep, avoidance of situations. And so when you are physically abusive, when you're doing abusive things, threatening, whatever the situation or circumstance may be, you are still operating in a triggered life. You are still operating in a way that is causing your life or the traumas and the wounds that you are experiencing internally are being expressed externally through your body, through your actions, through your mind, and certain things that you do. And so that's another example of a triggered life. Mentally, An example of triggered life mentally would be not being able to get balanced mentally, not being able to think clearly, negative thinking, overstimulated, can't think about anything else but what caused you to become triggered. Those are examples of being mentally triggered. And so understanding that we all have triggers in different situations, circumstances, different areas, different people may cause different triggers for us. And so those are just some of the examples that I gave just so you'll know what a triggered life looks like, because some of us have been in situations, household circumstances, relationships, marriages, whatever the situation or circumstance may be, we have been in them so long that it starts to become normal. And so we think we are because we have been doing it for so long, we have become desensitized to it. So now we think that it's normal, not understanding that those three examples that I gave, those three categories that I gave with the examples, those are actually examples of triggered lifestyles. Those are examples of triggered personalities and characteristic traits that people go through. And so not forgetting what a untriggered life is. It says a life where your traumas and wounds are no longer controlling you and causing you to react to situations harshly or destructively. So I gave you a definition of what untriggered lifestyle is, and then I gave you examples of what a triggered lifestyle is, so that you'll be able to be able to identify the difference between the two. And so then I have right here for another point, it says, how do you know if you're still triggered? It says, when situations and circumstances between individuals, places and things and circumstances causes you to respond in a way that you wouldn't if you were calm or in a stable mindset. And so when you're triggered, and I can't speak for everyone, so I'll just use it personally. When you're triggered, we are similar to animals. So when you're triggered, everyone has a different trigger response and how you respond. You have three. You have fight, flight, or freeze. You've heard me say this before in previous podcasts. So you have fight, flight, or freeze. And so when you're triggered, depending on what your response is in that moment is going to determine how you respond. And so say, for instance, someone who has a flight trigger response, if they are triggered, they're most likely going to hide and run away. They're what that looks like is that they most likely will be in avoidance. They will avoid a situation. They will avoid the conflict. They will avoid being around the person that triggered them, or they will avoid the situation or circumstance that triggered them. They will tend to avoid that situation. If you have someone with a fight trigger response, they will tend to, either depending on the person, depending on how they were raised, depending on their experiences. And I'm not condoning this. This is completely wrong. I am just saying that people respond different ways. They may be abusive. They may fight. They may think that them lashing out or being all big and bad, or whoever it is, whether it's man or woman, they may think that that's the way to protect themselves. That's how they gain safety, by fighting back and pushing back at whatever is causing them to feel unsafe. And then if you have someone who has a trigger response, a freeze trigger response, then they're going to just be stuck in the moment. They're just going to be there. They're going to be quiet. They're not really going to say much. They're just going to endure the situation or circumstance, and they're just going to be dumbfounded. They're not really going to know much to say. They're going to be stumbling over their words because they can't really think a coherent thought. They can't really put words together because they're so anxious and overstimulated. Their brain, their digestive system, their nervous system, everything has shut down in that moment because their trigger response is freeze. And so you have different categories of it. And I think it's good for people to know this, because we're going to go through a lot of uncomfortable situations while you're on this earth. And especially if you're going after success, if you're going after your goals and ambitions, it's going to require you to go after some uncomfortable situations and circumstances. And so not knowing how you respond in those moments, and knowing what your triggers are, and knowing how you respond when you're triggered is very important, because once you can identify it within yourself, you'll be able to overcome it. The thing about it is that even in the Bible, it talks about in Hosea 4:6, is my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And so if you do not identify what's bothering you, or identify what's going on in your life, or wherever certain situations and circumstances are coming from, they will continue to keep you in bondage. Another point that I have here is that these situations aren't always externally expressed. They can be internally expressed through having internal anger, rage, anxiousness, fear, doubt, guilt, shame, passive aggressiveness, and over apologization. Sometimes when you have a trigger response, your trigger responses, some people's trigger responses are not always expressed externally. Sometimes you have, and that's where the freeze category comes in. Sometimes your trigger response may be expressed internally. And so that means you may get quiet. That means you may get very frustrated and not be able to think too much. That means you may get angry, but your anger may not be in the form of abusiveness. Your anger may be in the form of now you're withholding love and compassion and care and servitude, whatever it may be. Sometimes your response to a certain trigger may not be expressed internally. Expressed externally. It may be expressed internally, which comes out externally. There's no such thing as unexpressed emotion. You may not express it right then. You may keep it internally. You may keep it inside of you, and it may fester. It may grow. It may germinate. It may develop. But eventually, that same emotion that you did not decide to let go of or get out right then, it will come up again eventually later down the road, or whatever the situation or circumstance may be. So understanding and checking in with yourself and seeing like, hey, even though I did not express this externally, let me check in with myself and make sure that I'm actually okay. Because if not, you can subconsciously start to build barriers, start to build walls. You can subconsciously start to build things that you can subconsciously start to build perceptions and subconsciously start to build things that was never intended to be built, but because you did not check in with yourself, you did not check yourself. Now you've built things that you should not need to waste the energy to demolish, but because you didn't take the time out to check yourself, now you have to spend time demolishing this area of your life, this barrier, this wall, because you didn't do the work in the beginning. Whatever the reason why of it was, you just didn't do the work. And so understanding that some triggers are inevitable. Some of them you're not even going to know that you have until you're in certain situations and circumstances. And I'll give you an example. How many people, whoever watches this, how many people, when they're by themselves, they might have the mindset of, I'm good. I'm actually a very calm person. I'm actually a very nice person. I'm actually very loving, or whatever the situation or circumstance may be, or I think I'll be a good partner. Then they decide to get in a relationship, and then they start to discover that their partner triggers or pokes and prods at certain things that they thought they had already overcome, that they thought they were already healed from, that they thought they were already done with handling. And so there are certain situations and circumstances that you could be healed from, or there are certain situations and circumstances that you're just not in to know whether or not you're actually healed from. And so understanding, don't feel bad about it. There's nothing to feel bad about, because how could you know unless you're in that situation or circumstance? Just understanding that when you're in it, once you discover it, if you're still not healed from it, do the work to make sure that you get healed from it. Don't beat yourself up. Don't feel bad. Don't think you're not good enough. Don't think as if though you are not, you haven't done the work. Just understand that how could you have figured this out without going through this situation? And so sometimes God uses certain situations and circumstances to reveal to yourself, to reveal to us that we're not as good or not as healed or not as straight or structured or stable as we thought we were. And that's why it's very important in 1 Peter 5:6, it says, humble yourself before the mighty hand of God and he will exalt you. I think it's in Proverbs 13 where it talks about pride goes before the fall. And so understanding, humbling yourself and lowering your pride to not look at yourself as more important than you think you are, not thinking of yourself more highly than you ought to think of yourself, is something that is very important to keep you even keeled and to understand and not beat yourself up so much. Okay, and so another point that I have here is how to overcome being triggered. And just some practical points that I can give to you based on my personal experience, some things that I've endured and I've actually done myself. Most of this stuff I've actually done myself. And like I've said in previous podcasts, I don't want to give you stuff I have not personally experienced. I have not personally done. I have not personally learned from the Bible, because I feel like I can't teach you I can't teach you something to the fullest extent that I've never endured. I can teach you based on perspective. I can teach you based on what I think, but I can't give you the full capacity and the full experience of how to navigate a situation in its fullness, in its entirety, if I have not done it myself, if I have not been through it myself, if God has not given me the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding for the situation or circumstance. And so I'll give you these 4 real quickly. And it says, get some help, talk to somebody, therapy, counseling, coaching, communities, groups, whatever, a trusted source, whatever it may be, get some help. Release yourself from the mental prison. The things that you've experienced, the things that you've been through, release yourself from that. You're no longer there. You no longer have to live in that mind state anymore. Being triggered doesn't always allow you to operate in freedom. Jesus came so that we can have freedom from any form of bondage. If you're currently in a triggering situation, slowly start to create space that you need to heal. If you're with someone that doesn't want you to heal, start to make adjustments for your life that you need. Start to make adjustments for your life that you need to free yourself. If you are in circumstances that are not allowing you to heal, create adjustments that's needed for the process to start the healing process. Then I have a verse for you in John 10:10, and this is the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I've come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. And so understanding that when you are not experiencing, when you are not living your life like John 10:10, you're going to be living beneath what God actually intended for us. You're going to be living beneath what we're actually supposed to, how we're supposed to actually live. And so another verse that I have here, and then I'll end on this, is James 1:19, 1:19 through 20. And it says, beloved brothers and sisters, let everyone be quick to hear, careful, thoughtful listeners, slow to speak, a speaker of carefully chosen words, patient, reflective, forgiving, slow to anger, patient, reflective, forgiving. For the deep-seated anger of man, and this is verse 20, for the deep-seated anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And so understanding that to live an untriggered life, that you're going to have to be able to manage your feelings and emotions. You're going to have to be able to manage yourself, to be aware of yourself. You're going to have to know that you shouldn't guilt yourself for certain things that you've been through. You should give yourself grace, the understanding, checking in with yourself, getting healing for yourself, also understanding that you matter, that you are important, and that you don't have to live a triggered life. So I hope this helps someone, and I'll see you guys next time.